With a grand design to boost tourism, Saudi Arabia launched tourist visas 3 months ago, but the public decency code in the country is creating hassles for tourists. Over 200 persons have been arrested so far for wearing immodest clothing, and charges of harassment have been levied. This has revived fears of moral policing, even as Saudi Arabia's crown prince is trying hard to ease social restrictions in the ultra-conservative kingdom. Social norms are gradually changing in Saudi Arabia, the kingdom which was once defined by the strict laws, religious, police, and unequal treatment of women is gradually opening itself to the modern world, or so it seems. Women can be seen driving cabs and are earning a livelihood. Decades-long ban on cinema has been lifted. Women can watch concerts and sporting events without fear of being punished. All this aimed to give an image makeover to the Saudi kingdom under the kingdom's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But things do not seem to be that simple on the ground. In September this year, when tourist visas were launched, there was a condition attached to their stay. The Saudi government issued a moral code which made wearing immodest clothing and public display of affection punishable. So has Saudi Arabia really changed, or are things back to where they started? It has now come to light that the Riyadh police arrested 200 persons for violating the public decency code. This is the first such crackdown ever since the code was introduced. And of these, 120 men and women got rounded up for wearing inappropriate clothing. Have a look at what clothing is forbidden by the Saudis. Men and women must avoid tight-fitting clothes. The clothing must not contain profane language or images. Women must cover their shoulders and knees in the public. The police arrested 88 persons for harassment. Most complaints were filed by women who were attending an electronic music festival hosted by the kingdom early this month. So should this worry tourists who are still keen on visiting the Saudi kingdom? Take a closer look now at the Decency Code. It lists out 19 offences. Taking photographs of persons without their permission is an offence. Playing music at prayer time too can cost you dearly. And if you are caught, fines can range between 50 and 6,000 riyals. Tourists have begun to cry foul. They say it's nothing short of moral policing. And joining us live on the broadcast this minute is Talmiz Ahmad, the former Indian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Iran and UAE. Thanks very much, Ambassador, for speaking with us here on WION World is One. Your initial comment on what we are looking at, these arrests, do you look at this as moral policing and the fact that Saudi Arabia has been making those attempts to try and arrive at an image makeover, but still has a long way to go in that direction?
Yes, we are getting very contradictory signals from Saudi Arabia. On the one hand, a major effort is being made by the Crown Prince to project the image of a modern state, a modern society, a modern culture. But on the other hand, you have an extremely conservative scenario where you have had a long tradition, more than a century-old tradition of modesty with regard to the public space, segregation of the genders and non-mixing of people, and also there have been restrictions on the movement of women and insistence of modest attire on their part. What has been happening over the last couple of years is that everything is moving very, very fast. Saudi Arabia, as it is under tremendous pressure globally because of various developments at home, and also the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, has been attempting to burnish its image in Western societies, particularly in the United States, with which it has a very solid strategic partnership. But they are moving very, very fast, as I said, and there is no clarity with regard to what the norms are. It is still a very conservative society. It still has the moral police in place. It just depends on how they wish to use them. Yes, there are very clear rules with regard to how people should deport themselves, in public, but many Westerners who come there as tourists are not familiar with these rules, and conduct themselves as they would in any other Western society, and would also dress in ways that would be unacceptable locally. So yes, we do have serious issues. I think there is absence of clarity, and I think certain of the people who have come into the country as tourists have not been informed properly about what is expected of them in terms of their public conduct.
Absolutely, and looking at the code of decency and just also letting our viewers know the way these reforms that Saudi Arabia has been aiming to bring in have been facing these overwhelming statistics. Saudi Arabia's moral policing has led to the Riyadh police arresting 200 persons for violating the public decency code, the first such crackdown ever since that code was introduced. And of these, 120 men and women got rounded up for wearing inappropriate clothing. And what exactly do the rules say? What is regarded as inappropriate clothing is that the clothing must not contain profane language or images. The men and women must avoid tight-fitting clothes. Women must cover their shoulders and knees in public. In fact, police arrested 88 persons for harassment. If I can go back across now, Ambassador Talbiz Ahmad, there are two things here. Firstly, how well informed do you think tourists are on the ground of these rules, and to what extent have they been made to understand that wearing this kind of clothing will invite the kind of action that has been meted out? And the other aspect of what does one do if one is actually facing such action? What kind of a remedial measure does that tourist really have?
I think there is absence of clarity in this regard. Tourism is something very, very new in the country. I'm not even sure the country is geared for this kind of Western-style tourism. There have been very severe restrictions with regard to the about the entry of people who are coming in as tourists, because we have so far had only business people or pilgrims or people seeking employment coming into the country. So tourism is something quite novel. And when you have a sudden influx of large numbers of Western people who dress in ways with which they are familiar, obviously we are going to have serious issues. I must also point out to you that Saudi Arabia is extremely rich in terms of tourism sites. If we were to explore some of the sites, they are connected with pre-Islamic history, with early Christian history, even with early Jewish history. And you have had remains of Romans and many other historical sites. Some of them have not been fully developed as yet. Saudi Arabia also has some of the world's best museums, which are a celebration of its past. So people would be interested in coming to the country, but the literature on the subject is very inadequate. At the same time, I'm not sure these tourists have fully understood what they are getting into. Yes, you are supposed to have modest dress, but what is modest in Saudi Arabia may not be considered anything special, as far as Western culture and Western society are concerned. So I think there is a real problem here. I don't call it moral policing just yet. Moral policing is much more intrusive, much more aggressive. What is happening here is a signal being given to tourists that yes, you are welcome into our country, but you must follow some of the clothing norms that we insist on. And typical Western tourists in other countries, and indeed many other tourists, tend to be quite casually dressed. Some of us would think they are also inadequately dressed. They also conduct themselves quite familiarly with each other in terms of hugging and kissing between people of opposite sex. None of this would be acceptable in Saudi Arabia even today. At the same time, I should also emphasize that there has been real change. Young people in Saudi Arabia are enjoying a freedom that they have never known before. They are truly excited about these changes. There is, for example, this prohibition on gender mixing seems to have been done away with. People are able to sit together in restaurants even if they are not related to each other or married to each other. They can attend public events together across the genders. So there has been real change. On that, there is no dispute. But these are difficult changes.
Right.
It must be clarified. It is a conservative society. It is a religious society. And it is going to have, problems of the kind you have been talking about.
Right, and the contradictory message, as you said, that's coming in, because on one hand, we do see women being given a lot more freedom as compared to earlier, but at the same time, we have women's rights activists being detained. We're going to leave it there for the moment. Ambassador, appreciate very much you joining us on the podcast with all of those perspectives and details.